Welcome to the Renews Podcast with me, Stephen Dunne.
There's about 25 gigawatts stuck. What we as an industry are doing, what developers can do as well, is short-term let go a little bit of your margin ambitions. We are definitely keen to invest ourselves to bridge the gap.
Hello listeners, and welcome to a special edition of the Renews Podcast, where I'm going to take you on the road with me. I've just landed into Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands on my way to Dutch offshore wind fabrication company SIF in nearby Rotterdam. CEO Fred van Beers has kindly agreed to show me around the foundation manufacturer's newly expanded site on the Maasvlakte and sit down for a chat afterwards. I've got about a 90-minute drive ahead to get to SIF, so I'll jump into the car and get going. Now, it's a fascinating time for monopile suppliers like SIF as they grapple with numerous challenges, including competition from Chinese rivals, the slowdown in firm orders, and challenges getting new factories up and running. SIF is a well-known and established name in offshore wind, but it isn't immune from these challenges. It's invested over €300 million expanding its site in Rotterdam to handle the huge foundations needed for 15 megawatt plus turbines. And that is where we'll start with Fred van Beers taking me around the company's flagship facility. The first thing you see as you drive up to the factory are piles and piles of steel plates lined up waiting to go into the plant. And Van Beers explained these are shipped directly into a custom-made harbour from supplier Dillinger before entering the facility.
This is all customer owned. So it's steel for every plate has its individual spot in a monopile. Every monopile is unique. Every monopile is designed to the specific spot in the field. So that means that all the steel plates have their own thickness dimensions to fit in a specific place in the monopile. Behind you there's three monopiles for Ecowende, Dutch project, the last few that we have now ready for loadout. And they are actually outfitted with vibrojetting system. There's three of them so there's a real monopile test now being executed in the coming month to see whether vibrojetting is a good solution to mitigate noise during installation instead of hammering, because the bigger they get, the more noise impact you have.
Before we even get to the door of the factory, there's a safety test, which I fail spectacularly when the SIF boss correctly points out a breach on my part.
When we go in, I have to put the hands out of the pocket. Safety.
Better record that. Make sure I'll tell all the listeners I'm very safety conscious.
Safety conscious. And I can tell you the record for a visitor is to warn him 10 times. So let's see.
And we need the earplugs.
And we need the earplugs now to put them in.
Yeah. See, I am.
Yeah, you're very safety conscious. That's good. That's good to hear.
So 10 is the record.
10 is the record to tell. Can you please take your hands out of your pocket?
Okay.
But I'll promise you I will be polite all the way.
Inside the factory door, you see the steel plates being rolled in on floor-level rollers, where the plates are being machined to the right size, before moving down several lines to be welded together into trees before being rolled into cans.
And what we're seeing here is a long hall with various different areas for working the steel and huge cranes really that can move the steel down the line.
That can move the steel at every individual workstation. So every this hall is 450 meters long and 65 meters wide, 70 meters wide, sorry. And every workstation has its own dedicated crane, because we want to avoid waiting times between stations, so everybody has its own crane. And then indeed you see three parallel bays where we weld plates together in order to prepare them for rolling. And the whole layout is for theoretically 500,000 tons, so 200 monopiles weighing 2,500 tons each can be produced here. So that's 10,000 tons per week.
Okay. And as you say, I'm struck by everything's being done at ground level here.
Yeah.
Which, as you say, gives you an advantage in the fabrication process.
Yeah, and safety. So, I mean, all our customers, irrespective of how late or delayed we are, say safety first, because it's heavy industry, easily leading to issues, and safety is our main priority and also our biggest challenge, to be honest, because it's easily happening that you tip over or have a heat injury, scratching your fingers, etc. We have to be very careful on that. So the whole layout facilitates at least that the overview is there. Yeah.
The other thing that strikes me, Fred, is when you look at the monopiles outside, the finished monopiles, they're huge. But at this point, it's welding together of steel plates being done individually by individual workers.
Yeah.
When you think about large factories, you think about automation and so on, but this is still a very human process.
It's still a human factor, and I think one of the main reasons is that every plate has its different thickness, length, qualification. We work with different materials, and the series are relatively small. So to bring in the level of automation to fully automate that, so to say, is in our view not weighing up to using labor as well. And there's also things like humidity, temperature change, etc. that have an effect and an influence on the welds. And since the weld quality has to be 100%, you need still the human interface to control that. But things like how much can we weld per hour, how controlled is the preheating of the steel plate, that is to a large extent automated, so to say. And so it's a semi-automated process, whereby it's also a fact that we have still certain potentials in the factory that we are working on to further optimize also the number of people that are working on this. But the main gain of this factory is that we skipped about 5 or 6 production steps out of the traditional way of working, which are the real on the benefit on one side. And the other benefit of this factory is that we can control the tolerances in such a way that we will be able to tell our customers that they can actually design the monopiles 5 to 10% lighter, so less steel, and that's on a 100,000 ton project, 10,000 tons of steel that you can save due to the production methods that we are applying here.
As we move down the line, we get to 2 huge steel rolling machines and dozens of pre-rolled cans being lifted around by giant grippers suspended from the ceiling, lining up, ready to enter the next assembly hall for welding.
And then we bring the plates, as you can see now happening, either to another position or load them into one of the 2 rollers.
Yes.
So that's the next phase. The hole becomes higher and higher, and we start rolling these plates.
And they start looking familiar to
and they become
readers.
more, you start seeing a bit of what becomes a monopile. Yeah. And here we have 2 roller mills, one that can handle cans, so straight, as you can see on the far end.
Yeah.
And this one can do cans and cones, the conical ones, so that they look like this.
Yes.
Yeah. And why is that? We talked about growing diameters. The top is always 7.5 or 8 meters, Siemens, Gamesa or Vestas. And the bottom is the grow. That's where the big diameters come in. So you need a tapered piece, so to say.
Of course.
And that means, in effect, more conical cans than now than that we had in the past.
These two machines that we're looking at, these are the only elements in the whole factory that actually turn steel, that roll it into a can, is it? Because
yeah,
I don't know why that's
I don't know what so.
Well, you imagine, you see these things and you imagine lots of these rolling steel, but obviously it's it's individual cans.
That's a good question, because that's what a lot of people think, that this rolling part is the key of the process and the bottleneck, so to say. Two remarks to that. One, it's basically it's not. It's the welding capacity that a factory has. The welding and process. Those are the two things. And we optimized the rolling process in such a way that the time you need to roll a plate and bring it to the next station, we sort of halved compared to the traditional way of doing things. Meaning that with relative low number of rollers, we can do this. Second thing, and the third thing we did is, after rolling, initial rolling and welding them together, you need to calibrate again. Bring it back into the roller and do a calibration. So make sure that it's fully round, within tolerance, to later on build them together as a monopile. That part we invested in 2 more rollers that are at the end of the hole. Gotcha. In order to not bring cans back against the process. So, as said, process logistics are key, and welding capacity is key, and we did not sacrifice on all of them.
I'm struck by also the speed. You know, I've seen images of inside of factory halls, and you imagine it takes a long time to get the steel rolled into cans. But as we've been standing here, I've seen plates welded, plates moved, I'm seeing cans, I'm seeing the gripper lift cans. It really moves along at a fair clip, as they say.
I'm happy you say that. We had different times here, but
trying to give you good press here.
No, but that's true. We're getting better and starts moving and moving better. And I think it's a good observation that as you say, that there's a multitude of things happening. It's not a serial thing only.
The other thing that strikes me is, obviously you've got all the cans here together. For the listeners, there's maybe 10 cans in front of us here. Mm-hmm. Are each of those cans part of the same monopile, or are they all different?
They are maybe part of 3, and that has to do with the building and loadout. Most of all, the loadout sequencing, and based on the loadout sequencing, we have the build sequencing, and that is determining the rolling sequencing. And some cans are, so to say, multifunctional. You will have the same dimension of can in various monopiles, but others are very specific. Most of them are very specific. So so planning logistics again is a thing, and as you can see, rolling the wrong set of cans has immediately an effect on your storage space and room to maneuver, because these things are big. We are looking here at cans between 8 and the maximum. The biggest one is 9.5, probably 9 meters. With 4 meters width, it's big stuff.
Turning the corner, it was into another huge hall where cans are being joined together to start looking like monopiles.
So this is what we already had, and where we have basically a north and a south growing line, or assembly line, where we build sections, and when sections are ready, so welded from the inside, welded from the outside. This hall is 540 meters.
And it's a line where basically you put the cans together into something like our listeners would recognise as a monopile. It starts
becoming at least part of a monopile.
Sure. And you've got 2, am I right in thinking there's 2 growing lines, is that what you call it?
Yeah, it's 4 setups where we build cans together. Okay. 2 on the north side, 2 on the south side, with sufficient room in between to move sections and cans around.
And we can see some of the cans sort of in the middle here.
Yeah.
And is that because they're not in the right place because maybe earlier repairs?
Yeah, because of some repairs and we always need a bit of buffer.
Sure.
Yeah. For example, for the reason that we just talked about, a crane repair that's being done now. We have cans coming in from Roermond that need to be stored. Will be used in this project. We have a bit of final preparation, and it's basically the idea is that every build station has a complete set of cans sitting next to it, so that they can continue the process.
As we walked along the line with foundations towering above us, the SIF man was quick to point out a flush connection between the various different cans.
I haven't told you how we do that because that's the secret of the cook.
Trade secret.
But you don't see any difference between one and the other, and that is with this sort of dimensions. We basically work with tolerances of a clockmaker. Here we know that we can make the difference compared to others.
And what does that difference mean for the
That difference
product?
means that if you think of a good question, because when this in the end is a monopile that sits in the soil and is constantly loaded. So the load lines that go through the monopile, it's important that they go very smoothly through there, to make it simple. If the difference between the cans is too much, you get a sort of bend in the load lines. And you can solve that by adding more steel. But the other way around counts as well. If you can guarantee that it is close to zero, that difference, you can actually limit the safety margin in steel, because you know that the load lines go through smoothly.
And your life of your monopile does what it says on the tin rather than... Does it affect the lifetime?
Yeah, well, a wind farm normally is calculated with a certain lifetime.
Yeah.
Based on that lifetime, the design is made, including the tolerances, the fatigue tolerances, and that's where we feel the trick is. You still know it's 30 years, you still know what the load is, but your fatigue tolerances can be reduced.
Sure.
And that's of course exciting because that's new to the industry, and I know, and you know, how conservative the industry is. But I think in order to really achieve the 30% reduction that we all want to see on levelized cost of energy, it's coming out of this sort of initiatives and innovations.
So that top secret method is saving some steel?
10% of steel.
10%.
So 100,000 ton easily on a project is 10,000 tons of steel. Thinking about a circularity and CO2 footprint perspective, because we will talk later on tender qualifications, etc., and the non-pricing criteria, I mean, in the end, are important, because in the end you do this to reduce CO2.
It was then into the final part of the process, the blasting halls, where monopiles are painted before being rolled out onto the quayside.
6 permanent coating shops and 3 temporary coating shops, 9 in total.
And this is where they start to look like the finished product, whether
Exactly.
it's the white or the green or the yellow, if there's an integrated
Yeah.
TP.
Yeah. This is I think the last one from the Ecowende project. It's now curing. It's finished. It's statically there because that's where you are doing the final coating of those areas that you cannot touch when turning around. On the right side, here we have the first from Baltic. Basically, these coating shops, here we do washing, blasting, all the recirculation of the blast and the water and the waste, what have you. And then the multi-layer coating is being done, metal spraying, etc. So you see this one is in the preparation phase. It's not done yet on the outside, but the whole flange, airtight ring inner side of the top side has been prepared. First coating layer is on, the red one. So they're going to build it up and materialize. And then, but the thing doesn't move anymore, but it's rolling again on the roller beds. So in the area where it's rolling, you cannot paint. And that's what we do on the other side.
And this is a finished monopile.
A finished monopile, but not finished in coating.
Of course.
No.
Put in.
Yeah, but this one is finished.
Okay. They're quite not the longest monopile.
No, they're relative short. It's for the Baltic Sea. So it's not so deep, but it's you don't need more than what you need. And this is a good point, because that actually illustrates that the number of monopiles we produce per week is not often we get the question, are you up to 4 now? Yeah, we are up to 4, but actually we should be 6 because they're a lot smaller. Whereas in the other example, 4 is actually extremely good.
And, we're seeing lots of conversation about deep water monopiles, and not so much about the diameter anymore, but starting to talk about the length.
Yeah.
What point is the cut-off, do you think, for...
Well, we believe and are prepared for 120 meter long monopile, so that's roughly 60 meters of water depth. We think that is achievable, and we can do that.
You are listening to the Renews podcast. For breaking news or to access our exclusive market intelligence on the global renewables sector, subscribe at renews.biz. Now, back to the show. We're just back from an extensive visit of your facility here, which was fascinating. And, as we talked about, you've expanded the facility here to handle 15 megawatt turbines. And, it hasn't all been plain sailing, as you've said, over the last number of months. Can you tell us maybe right now, as we sit here today, where you're at on the ramp up of this factory and when you expect to really hit top power, as it were?
We're pretty happy with where we are now. We have found the momentum to speed up the production. You've seen it yourself. We're decently producing monopiles at the moment. We are not fully there yet, and what I mean with that is that this factory was designed with a certain purpose, to deliver certain benefits to the customers, and we've now come to the phase to materialize these benefits in order to be able to sell them for the next wave to come. So we are able to deliver on the order book we have today. We are able to deliver that in time, in the right quality, safely, and we expect to further optimize the ramp up during the remainder of this year.
So all in all, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably 6 to 8 months behind where you expected to be. And SIF isn't alone in building or extending a factory in Europe, and isn't alone in having that ramp-up problem with Isaiah Wind. We've seen it with Sia Wind in the UK. I won't ask you to speak for those guys, but why is it so hard to get a factory like this up and running? What are the reasons behind those delays?
From a SIF perspective, indeed, I think specifically the first element is that we did build something new also to us, which has taken more time to understand than initially thought of, for sure. That was a mistake we made. And the other element, and I think all of us are facing that, it's still a people's business. And in order to train hundreds of people working in a 3-shift system in a reliable and robust way is simply taking time. More time than you may have thought of in the beginning. That's for sure. Luckily, in our case, we build in sufficient float in our order book. And we didn't fully book the order book, as you probably may recall. At 25, we only booked 54%, and 26 was booked at 75% or something like that. So we had time to deal with these unexpected delays. But that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is that these monopiles are big and have become even bigger now. And as you've seen yourself, it's not easy stuff to handle and move around, and that is an additional challenge to handle.
Is there, I was struck by this walking around, is that part of the lesson here for not just SIF but the whole industry, in that, I've been writing about offshore wind for 15 years and can remember the very quick pace from the 6 megawatt to the 8 megawatt to the 11 megawatt to 14, then there were 15, then there's talk to 2020. That talk has stopped, but every incremental step along that stage has required the supply chain to ramp up and become bigger. Yeah. Is that one of the lessons here, that the delays you've had show that every single move from the turbine down
is challenging for everybody, and that we need to focus as an industry on this platform.
Yep. And I think the word missing in what you just said is increasingly challenging. So it's not a linear sort of ramp up, because I agree with you. In the beginning, going from 4 to 6 meters in our case, depending on the turbine, was relatively easy. And that, I think, also created a sort of a sense of this is doable in further ramping up, because the next step was a bit more difficult, but actually not that difficult. Up till the moment where we are now, that we are facing what I call the Airbus 380 phenomenon, that you have reached a certain level whereby things are not so easy anymore, and physical restrictions, but also space restrictions, not only for us. We've seen how big the site is and what the spaces that we need, but you also need increasingly big size for the vessels to sail. For we looked at the Haliade and how big the blades are. Well, these bigger turbines require even bigger blades, and where to store them, how to handle them. It all has become increasingly difficult and expensive and risky to deal with. And I think that's the phenomenon that we have been faced with now over the last few years.
We saw developers put pressure on the OEMs to come out with new machines. Where, over the last few years, and OEMs then tried get into this arms race to create bigger machines. I think that's the heat has come out of that a little bit now through the correction of the offshore wind industry post Ukraine and COVID. Where do you see the mindset of the industry now? Is it focused on industrializing the supply chain that we have now, or will it take, is it easy for it to switch now to focus on another large turbine to try to bring costs down?
What I tend to see, and also, I'm not so sure if I'm fully objective here, but in the discussions I'm having and in listening to many of my colleagues, I see a clear tendency to now stick for a while to this 15, maybe pimp it up to 18 megawatt platform and industrialize and optimize the supply chain for that. We are, as foundation builders in Europe, we are organized and discussing this as well. And we'll come to that topic maybe later, but we clearly see that when we stick now to this 15, 18 megawatt and look at what has been agreed on the North Sea Summit, for example, then the European supply chain is up to the task. And we spent ourselves a decent 1.5 years investing in ramping it up. Our colleagues in the UK, Spain are doing the same or have been doing the same. And they're set up to deal with this now. So I think it's to the benefit of all of us in order to also realize this 30% reduction of CapEx, OpEx cost in order to make the levelized cost of energy more attractive or doable in the business case. We have it all now in hand to do it by sticking to a 15 to 18 megawatt platform and harvesting on all the investments done.
We have it all, but as you signalled last week when you brought out your results, there is a slowdown now happening in tender activity in 2027.
Yeah.
And at the moment, 28. Can you give us a little bit of colour about that issue, what you're seeing in the market and why we're seeing that slowdown in tender activity?
First of all, we did a bit of a calculation in-house, and that we feel there's about 25 gigawatts stuck now in Europe and UK. That's a lot. And why are they stuck? Because they were all released, tendered, auctioned in a period whereby calculations were still assuming a certain supply chain price, offtake possibility, that due to geopolitical reasons, the war, increasing cost of money, have made the business cases not viable. And that was realized. And in the new setup, we see CFDs now coming based on the UK model being rolled out in Europe. And that actually, in my view, creates this downturn massively now, because everything that has been auctioned or tendered for is without these subsidies in CFD, in Europe at least. Or in the UK is not actually, they're thinking, well, in the next round we could probably get a better price for it. So they are stuck, and we're still waiting for the new ones. And that has now resulted in a massive downturn. I think the biggest country is suffering is Germany at the moment, but also the Netherlands. We've seen quite some setbacks on this that we are all struggling with, and governments are struggling with, because it's difficult to give in retrospective another subsidy or to those projects, because that will create a huge a pile of work for all legal people to deal with, but doesn't help us as a total. So my plea is that I think we willing to step over that hurdle, accept some support coming in now without having all these legal fights, and make sure that all these investments in not only in fabrication but also in installation vessels, because we talked a lot about in the past about the shortage of installation vessels. A massive investment round has been done. Ships are coming to the business now and are sitting idle. If not, and that's not good for us as an industry.
What would it mean for a company like SIF, having invested in this facility here behind us, to go through a period of a couple of years where activity was really low?
The main thing is loss of experience. So the company will survive. Last week we were declared strategic under the Net Zero Industrial Act, which is a great achievement. We know we have a lot of support to bridge that downturn from banks and government and and other financial institutes. But we need to let go about then in such a threat case a significant part of our people and basically letting go all the experience we gained during that period.
And the challenge there will be ramping back up.
That's exactly it. Letting them go is not nice, but is doable. But they won't come back that easy. So ramping up again, and if you look at the ramp up that we foresee, it's quite steep, and that will be a costly one for us, but for everybody.
Is there anything beyond what you've just said around governments maybe looking again at some of those support and subsidy contracts? Is there anything beyond that governments can do? And what is the role developers have in trying to place firm orders during this period?
Well, for developers, I'm not so sure what they can do other than actually really supporting the European supply chain. And because there's always this interesting option to go for the cheap Asian solution. Let's put it that way, specifically China, of course. But that, on the long term, is I think, a mistake, to be honest. So live up to what everybody is preaching, that this is a European supply chain and that we have to support each other in that. I think what we as an industry are doing, to be honest, and what developers can do as well, is short term let go a little bit of your margin ambitions. We are definitely keen to invest ourselves in order to bridge the gap and keep the experience on board. So that's I think the gesture we as a supply chain in general are making or can make further, but that would also require developers to take a similar approach in that and live and let live.
For the good of the industry.
For the good of the long-term interest for all of us.
Just finally on this, before maybe we pick up one or 2 points, like I said, you've just invested heavily in this factory and you're now sitting probably where you didn't expect to be with a 27 and 28 downturn. How frustrating is it that you've done what governments wanted you to do and you've invested, you've done it at risk, and now you're sitting potentially with a lack of a pipeline that you were promised?
We claim to be civilized people, so I will keep the piece of wood back where it should be in the woods. But on a scale of 0 to 10, it's 10. It's ultimately frustrating that we've done our bit in living up to the promise of investing heavily in a ramp up. Of course, nobody had foreseen these wars and the effects coming from that. I take that one, but if we truly believe that we want to be energy independent, and I think last week developments have shown that it's even more important to be as quickly as possible energy independent, let alone believe what we are doing with respect to the energy transition. We need to prioritize certain things in life, and one of them, in my view, is energy security for not for us as a business alone, but for the whole community and for the stability in Europe.
You mentioned the competition in monopiles. In some ways, the horse is bolted in that we see now regularly big shipments of monopiles coming in from a number of different fabricators in China. That happened relatively quickly, yeah. I would say. Historically, actually, there were monopiles from China, and then it stopped, and it was mostly Europe. But now we're seeing the Chinese players really compete. How do you look at that?
Well, let's see how it happened. Because in all fairness, we saw a boom of offshore wind a few years back, and that's why we built this factory, etc. But as a European supply chain, we were not ready to facilitate all those projects in that short period of time. So that led to a situation that developers that had to live up to their promises in relation to the tender and deadlines of delivering power had to decide to go and look for alternatives. So in a way that we opened the Chinese market ourselves, in all honesty and fairness. I think what we should learn from that is that when we roll out or prepare ourselves for the new boom, we need to do that in a controlled way to start with, and that's why I think I was at one of the discussion tables in Hamburg during the summit, and that was one of the issues, that we need a controlled rollout of projects now from the various countries in order to prevent this from happening again, that we see a massive peak, not with huge price increases and what have you, and all sorts of logistic problems, but do it in a controlled way. So that's one learning we took from that time. Going further down the road, we are not against Chinese imports. We are heavily against subsidized and non-level playing field imports. I think, and there's two sides to that. One is, if you look at it from a pure CO2 footprint perspective, and building wind farms at sea to reduce the CO2 emissions, and then bringing them in, these heavy structures from Asia, you can ask yourself the question, is this the right thing to do? That's one thing that I think should be translated in non-pricing criteria and tenders. That's one side of the thing. And the other side is that the steel that is used, we use steel for foundations. Steel in China is maybe half the price from European steel, and that is absolutely impossible without subsidy. So protecting steel plates to be imported in Europe or the UK is happening, but what's not protected is the semi-finished product or the end product. And in a business like ours, or in tower business or whatever, heavily steel dependent, that is creating a non-level playing field market, and this has to be corrected quite soon in Brussels and in London.
So, just so I'm clear on this, an Asian fabricator can import a finished monopile without any duties or tariffs, but if they introduce a steel plate, there is a tariff.
Yeah, there's a tariff. And coming back, in all honesty, to developers, I know for fact that some of our friends are trying to find ways to bypass the duties by welding plates in China together, claiming it's a semi-finished product and not a plate, and then importing them without duties. And I think that is the sort of responsibility we have as Europeans to not do and try to stimulate for the sake of a short-term gain. But
when you look with whatever data you have, when you look at the price differential between a European-made monopile and a Chinese-made monopile, is that the only differentiating factor, or are they also achieving cost savings in other areas?
They are, for sure. I mean, I think the labor costs, etc., will be different, but our claim, and I'm talking on behalf of the whole industry, not only SIF, is that the efficiency and procedures that we have in the meantime developed can deal with that sort of labor cost differences. So in that sense, it's an easy one. It's steel. Deal with the steel and deal with the end product in relation to steel, and the rest we will have to deal with ourselves. Because competition is good. Push for cost competitiveness and production efficiency is good, and should be part of this industry as well, because it's healthy. So protecting us against the Chinese is not what we need. We need to have a level playing field.
Are you seeing Europe recognise your arguments? And, you know, we've seen the Net Zero Industry Act, we've seen the Industrial Accelerator Act last week. You know, are they going to meet you guys in the European steel industry and go for what you're saying?
Yes. The question is how quickly. So yes, one example, I said it before, we last week we were given this notice to be part of the Dutch Net Zero Industrial Act strategic company group of 2 at the moment. There's only 2 companies in the Netherlands, one of them is SIF, which illustrates that they take this serious, that we have certain protectionism, we're protected because of that and have some benefits because of that, which is good, we like that. Now, the things like we discussed on steel tariffs on semi-finished, finished products needs to be dealt with quickly. We see the drive in Europe to do that, and in The Hague for our country, but we also see the inexperience and question marks in the eyes of people dealing with that, because after 30 years of open market politics and open market rules and regulations turning quickly into a sort of protection mechanism, and turning that around from ambition into real rules and regulations is a challenge. And that's where we as an industry, in my view, need to actively help, and they're open to that help and support.
When would be too late?
And if we don't change things in 26, it's too late.
And are you fearful that Europe, in the midst of a geopolitical uncertainty now where we see the US, you know, America first, we see Russia carrying out its activities, you know, we see China on the other side, and this criticism of Europe being very slow to act and rules and regulations, are you concerned Europe just won't get its act together on this?
I tend to say that we must, otherwise we're toasted. And the sense of urgency is increasing per week, in my view. So you see, I mean, we had the similar thing with the defense industry, of course, the famous 5%. And the first 2 years, last 2 years, everybody was struggling how to get their act together. But now we see the first examples of big factories being set up, gaining momentum in rolling this out. And I have a strong belief that we are able to do this once the pressure is fully on. And also in my private life, I more and more get the feedback that people start realizing, shit, this is serious, this is real, we need to do something.
Just finally on China and the threat there, are you confident that if the field is leveled, that you can still compete with Chinese fabricators on price, because they are very aggressive?
I am convinced. And you know, but there's another mechanism we didn't touch on yet, and that is system integration. I talked about system integration from a component perspective and taking that out, but there's another, I think, huge potential here, is that we look more at standardized and integrated concepts of wind farms. Because today, a developer is looking at the tier 1 suppliers and doing its own integration without letting the various suppliers really bundle their forces in order to come with an optimized concept. And in the discussions I've had, and I'm having today with T&I contractors, with offline, with OEMs, and with individuals in the industry, what you can actually achieve by doing value engineering, system integration, standardization of concepts when you have a longer term pipeline of 15 megawatt wind farms. That's where the real benefit of levelized cost, to reduce levelized cost of energy is in. Optimization of your O&M principles and contracts. That's where the real beef is.
Finally, Fred, we're a week after you announced your retirement, which is coming up later this year. And obviously you'll stay on for a period in an advisory capacity for, I think, until early next year.
Yep.
You've already told me you don't play golf. So I guess I'm interested to know, when you reflect on your 8 years, as you've said, in offshore wind, you know, what are you taking from the industry at this part of your career, and would you have a parting message for the sector?
I think we touched on it already. I mean, that's learn a bit more from other industries and take some bigger steps in working together in partnership, controlled rollouts, and don't exaggerate in ramping up too quickly.
So if you don't play golf, what will it be? Fishing? Something else?
I hate fishing as well. So that no, I'm a keen sailor. So I love sailing. I love giving advice and using my experience on a project basis, I guess. In all honesty, I haven't given it a real thought. I also like biking. I'm trying to figure out what's the right balance between using professional experience and using free time while still healthy. Being a good grandfather, maybe.
Well, a fair win, Steve. Thanks for having
Thanks.
me, and thanks for being on the Renew podcast.
It was a great pleasure having you. Thank you.
The Renews podcast was produced and edited by me, Stephen Dunne. Click subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. For more exclusive market intelligence on the renewable sector, see renews.biz.